question, but welcome to my world. These are the two things that I think about most of the time these days, the environment and blockchain. And when I was putting this together, I thought this might be an interesting way to, to start the discussion. Let's see here. So the first thing I want to say is that in both cases, the blockchain and the environment, a single location or a single block is inextricably linked to all the rest. So another way to say that is they're both networks. And blockchain obviously is a network in the sense that it's a digital ledger of transactions that's duplicated and distributed across the entire network of computers. And the environment is a web of interconnected species and ecosystems, resources and humans that form that network. Both the environment and blockchain are global and distributed, and most blockchain nodes are distributed across the entire global internet. And obviously, we're increasingly aware from the environment perspective that there really only is one environment. It's the network, and it's all interconnected, and what happens in one part of the world affects the environment in another part of the world. But they're also both decentralized, meaning they have, call it a consensus mechanism that operates automatically. The feedback mechanisms can cause systems to operate according to their rules. Now, that might be a different way to think about it, but I think it's accurate in both of those cases. So let's talk about those automatic consensus mechanisms, which operate, again, both in blockchains and in the natural environment. Blockchains are programmed to automatically keep the data across the distributed ledger intact through various mechanisms. The two most common, and we'll talk more about these, are proof of work, which are effectively a generation 1 or generation 2 consensus mechanism, and proof of stake, which is a generation 3 mechanism. So if, in the case of the environment, if one species overpopulates a local area, resources will become depleted and resources will become depleted and or waste will overwhelm the local environment. So if you think about, near where I live in the backwoods of Maine, if there's an area where there are deer and the deer are not controlled by a predator or by hunting, then what can happen is the deer will overpopulate. They'll literally strip off the trees and the vegetation, and the carrying capacity of that area will become reduced, and therefore that will lower the ability for that population of deer to survive, and they will die back to a balance point again. So the environment has this built-in mechanism, sort of whether we like it or not, I guess is the way I would say it. Let's see what else here. So next slide. So let's talk about ESG. So environmental, social, governance metrics are used to measure the non-financial impacts of a company. From an environmental perspective, climate impacts is the one that we all think about all the time. We hear about energy, which is a contributor to climate impacts, but energy in itself, whether directly used by the business or, say, to produce electricity, which is then used by the business, waste, pollution, recycling, natural resource conservation, treatment of animals. These are all areas that we can put some metrics around to see how is the business doing with respect to environmental metrics. On the social scale and the social aspect, we've got health, safety, and equity, whether it's with the community, employees, or other stakeholders. Equity in particular, economic equity, economic opportunity, equality of economic opportunity are increasingly important social drivers for businesses to be aware of and try to help overcome some of the challenges that occur with economic inequality. And from a governance perspective, accurate and transparent accounting is critically important. Integrity of the governance of a business and diversity, not only in hiring, but in leadership and overall accountability of that organization to its constituents, employees, community, customers, vendors, etc. So environment is what I focus on. And it's increasingly, ESG is increasingly used by investors, lenders, and buyers. And let's just talk a little bit about that. This is not a flash in the pan. ESG is not a fad or a short-term trend. Bloomberg said that ESG is upending the world's finance and investing as it moves from the periphery to the mainstream. McKinsey, the worldwide consultancy, said the growing evidence that sustainable corporate practices link closely to the performance is focusing investor and acquirer attention on ESG scores. The Economist, obviously the economic publication, said, at the end of this process, it will cease to exist as something separate from financial recording, but we will look back on the journey and wonder at the flat earth nature of where we are. ESG is just going to be incorporated into what businesses report on in terms of reporting and forecasting their success. So if we look at this in the investment community, global ESG assets under management, you can see, have grown sharply in the past and are projected to continue to grow sharply. I think this is pretty obvious when you look at financial aspects, you look at what are the winners and losers in equity markets, et cetera. Similarly, in the debt world, from an ESG perspective, we can see that there are now specialized categories of lending specifically targeted at ESG and sustainability. Sustainability-linked bonds, sustainability bonds themselves, green loans, sustainability-linked loans, social bonds, green bonds, all of these categories you can see are forming a hockey stick of increase and are projected to continue to do so. So environmental, again, which is my focus, and here are a couple of quotes to, I think, kind of set the stage. So Ban Ki-moon, the former UN secretary, said, quote, climate change is the single greatest threat to a sustainable future. But at the same time, addressing climate change represents a golden opportunity to promote prosperity, security, and a brighter future for all. And I think that's extremely important and well said. It's not a choice between sustainnable and economic wealth and prosperity. They're inextricably linked. Stephen Hawking, the world famous, late great world famous physicist and author, said, one can see from space how the human race has changed the earth. Nearly all of the available land has been cleared of forest and is now used for agriculture or urban development. The polar ice caps are shrinking and the desert areas are increasing. At night, the earth is no longer dark, but large areas are lit up. All of this is evidence that human exploitation of the planet is reaching a crucial, critical limit. But human demands and expectations are also ever increasing. We cannot continue to pollute the atmosphere, poison the ocean, and exhaust the land. There isn't any more available. So again, sustainability is in our future, and it's clear we have to transform from an extractive and a disposable economy to a circular one. So what exactly is the promise of this new technology called blockchain? So blockchain is transparent. The blocks can be inspected. The data in a blockchain can be inspected by anybody. They're immutable. This consensus mechanism makes it so that a block is put on and stays there. It never changes. They can be fast. No central control is required, which has the advantage. Central control can have its own set of agenda, if you will, that could corrupt things. And so it's efficient and it can be very inexpensive. So again, the title of the talk is Third Generation. So let's talk about the evolution of blockchain. So the first generation, circa 2009, fundamentally is what everybody, the lay public, think about when they hear blockchain. They think of cryptocurrency. They actually think of cryptocurrency. They don't think about blockchain, which is, cryptocurrency is a store of value and it has a mechanism for transfer. And obviously the leading example of that is Bitcoin. And as we will discuss more and more, proof of work is the consensus mechanism, and it has an impact from the first generation. So second generation primarily is thought of as Ethereum. And now, in addition to simply storing value, you can be storing data in a distributed, using distributed ledger technology. Now, second generation, circa 2015, also enabled smart contracts and distributed apps. Distributed apps are applications that, just as the database of blockchain is not contained in a single server or controlled by a single entity or monetized by that single entity, a distributed app similarly is spread out across the blockchain and is not controlled by an individual entity. So the example I use is, if you use an iPhone like I do, every app that's on your iPhone, every app in the iOS ecosystem goes through the iPhone App Store and is monetized by Apple. Apps on blockchains don't have to go through a single repository or be monetized by that central entity. The second generation still uses proof of work. The third generation, circa about 2017, can do the same things, but now has added other capabilities. It can be hybrid, which means not only can it be public, but the business can have some of the data in their own node private for them. And that's typically what happens. You have accounting data, you have public-facing accounting data, reports, P&Ls, balance sheets, and the like, and you have private corporate proprietary accounting data. And so a public-private blockchain like XDC can provide both of those. Forensics can be built in. So the blockchain is, again, programmed to have the data stay intact, but you still may want to be able to have audits. You may be able to want to see, how did this data get in here? What node put it in, et cetera. And so forensics can be built into XDC and some other third generation blockchains. And most importantly, third generation can be faster and lower cost, more secure. Very important. And it will help drive the productivity. So examples, as I said, are XDC and others. And a major difference is most use proof of stake, or in the case of XDC, delegated proof of stake. So let's talk a little bit about the blockchain evolution with respect to smart contracts. So Ethereum had started out and is still a dominant player in generation 2 and 3. It is generation 2. And there are over 47 million contracts developed on smart contracts developed on the Ethereum network. And the growth, though, has leveled off. And you can see here, I'm going to point here, there we go. See here that the distinction between the growth rate and what Ethereum is doing, that gap is being filled in by third generation projects. And so that's part of, again, the data that suggests first has come in, second has come in, and now third generation is really starting to take hold. Another way to look at that same third generation increase is if you look at a distributed finance, DeFi, and you look at the total amount of value locked in, and you look at the percentage of that total value locked in by chain, you see that over 90% of the value used to be Ethereum, and now it's dropped considerably to, say, less than 50% or thereabouts. And that trend will continue. And so again, third generation projects are coming in and taking significant positions within the marketplace. So any new technology, as I've said, has promise and the potential of unintended consequences. So the example I use is technology has done a phenomenal job over the last century of increasing the productivity of arable land, increasing the productivity of farms. But the first generation improvement included tremendous use of chemical pesticides and chemical fertilizers. And there was a huge unintended consequence of poisoning air, water, and land. And as a result, subsequent generations have figured out more sustainable ways to do the farming, keep that productivity up, but have less of an unintended consequence of pollution and that kind of thing. So with blockchain, energy efficiency is vital, and the increase in energy usage by first and second generation blockchains is the unintended consequence. So climate change is simply this generation's greatest challenge. And burning fossil fuels to create electricity and heat and transportation is the single largest contributor to climate change. As I've said, generation 1 and generation 2 use proof of work as the consensus mechanism. And that is highly energy intensive. And, you know, it's kind of been called mining for a number of reasons. And one of the reasons is because it's very intense work. And generation 3, on the other hand, uses proof of stake, or in the case of XDC, delegated proof of stake, which is literally millions of times more energy efficient for the same outcome, or even a better outcome. So don't be deceived by generation 1 or 2 claims of using clean energy. We have to both reduce the rate of energy increase and get more and more of our energy from clean renewable sources like wind and solar. So again, from a blockchain evolution perspective, you can see the speed going up from, call it 3 to 15 to 2,000 transactions per second. The fees going down from $15 to $10 to minuscule fractions of a dollar in the case of the XDC network. Transaction speeds, confirmation going down from, you know, an hour to, you know, tens of seconds to, you know, single seconds. And we talked about smart contract support being added in. And again, the big thing here to look at is the energy consumption of first generation is 9.6 million times generation 3. We've had a 3.5 million times energy efficiency increase from second generation to third generation. That is a huge, huge improvement. So blockchain is well suited to improve supply chain. Supply chain, what we're all working on here, you folks in the Blockchain Supply Chain Association are working on, supply chain is the lifeblood of the global economy. And I've sort of broken down into three main areas of opportunity. So logistics can be improved. Distributed ledger technology, which is what blockchain is well suited to a distributed business. We'll talk more about that. Financial, there's a tremendous trade finance gap. So there is more demand for capital than there is capital available. The quote here is that the gap has ballooned from $1.5 trillion US in 2019, and due to COVID is now estimated to be about $3.4 trillion. So getting that liquidity into the supply chain is going to help the global economy and the supply chains and the global economy tremendously. From an environmental perspective, and we'll talk about how the blockchain can help in environmental impact as well. From an environmental perspective, quote, this is from Andrew Wilson, the International Chamber of Commerce Global Policy Director. He said, "It is increasingly clear that trade finance is lagging behind other asset classes when it comes to incorporating sustainability. If you want to enable sustainability at scale and to do it in a robust way, there's an absolute need for digitalization. If banks can tag transactions as sustainable, can we then find if there's a correlation between sustainability performance and credit performance, which of course has been shown." So let's talk a little bit about trade finance. So international trade has been on the rise for the last 50 years. Globalization has been a tremendous force in our economy for decades. And it's gone from $62 billion in 1950 to a peak of nearly $20 trillion in 2018. So with global shipping and the amount of time it takes from source to customer, the basic problem is capital, working capital during transit. We talked about the trade finance gap. Trade finance represents a significant portion of trade volumes, about 80%. And that trade finance gap, more demand for capital than there is capital available, is one of the top 3 export obstacles for half of countries globally. So let me just say, I'm focused on the E in ESG, but trade finance has a tremendous impact on S, on social, on specifically economic equality. Those half of countries globally that really can use more capital for the supply chain, that half is mostly developing nations. So for developing nations to have good access to global markets, which will increase their stability, their sustainability, their economic viability, that is one of the benefits as we work through more and more trade finance and add liquidity into that system. It will improve developing nations' fortunes, literally. So what's the problem in trade finance? Well, the problem is actually not the default rates. The problem is not this is a risky investment. The default rates overall are very low, 1.5% maybe. The issue is how to lower transaction costs. So it doesn't matter whether you're talking about import letters of credit, export letters of credit, loans for import-export, or performance guarantees. All of that only adds up to about 1.5%. So it's very low risk. The real issue is transaction cost overhead. And technology is something that has time and time again proven its ability to improve overheads, reduce overheads, improve efficiencies. And blockchain is no exception. So digitalization onto the blockchain is the enabler of that increased efficiency. So let's take a minute to talk about NFTs. We kind of have a joke that says, not all NFTs are about Bored Apes. Bored Apes was if you don't know, was some art that was put into a non-fungible token that sold for all kinds of money. And the news, it seems to really be fascinated by the idea that NFTs, these digital works of art, are selling on blockchains for millions of dollars. That's an interesting use of NFTs, but it's not really where you're going to see the fundamental change that becomes the bedrock of our digital accounting and database system worldwide. So blockchains started as networks of tokens of value. Tokens of value, just like euro notes or dollar bills or whatever, one $1 bill and another dollar bill are interchangeable. So tokens are interchangeable. Real world goods are not interchangeable. You need, if you're going to finance, you're going to finance this set of goods that are in transit, not just any old set of goods. And so non-fungible tokens, NFTs, can be used to represent those goods in transit, and Internet of Things hardware, scanners, radio frequency ID tags, can be used to facilitate easy and accurate tracking of those goods with greater efficiency. And blockchain also facilitates supply chain finance. Once those assets are tagged, and in a way that's immutable and trustworthy, et cetera, this allows lenders to connect their instruments, their financial instruments, to collections of these assets through these NFTs. Smart contracts also can be used to increase the efficiency, lower the cost of the transaction, and improve the accuracy of funds flow. So instead of a whole sort of telephone chain of communication, it can literally be that the shipment is scanned when it leaves the supplier's dock, and it's scanned when it is received at the customer's end, and that triggers an automatic payment across blockchain that goes from buyer back to seller, increasing efficiency, reducing costs, and increasing speed. So the other thing that happens is you put those NFTs in, and now what you can really do is you can add additional layers, and those additional layers, that data, can have ESG attributes assigned to it and tracked on it. So you can add, what's the carbon footprint? What's the energy use? Did this, from a social perspective, did this come from a grower or a producer that was using socially responsible, equitable conditions for their workers, safety, et cetera? And so consumers, customers, more and more want to know where their goods come from and are willing to pay premiums for things that are have the right attributes, the right non-financial attributes, not just the specs of the product, but increasingly the specs of how that product came into being. So in terms of turning these ideas into real world, I'm happy to say that the Trade Finance Distribution Initiative exists. This is a wonderful collection of some of the world's leading banks and non-bank financial institutions who are formed for the purpose specifically of liquefying, adding liquidity into trade finance. And XDC is the first and only blockchain to be invited to join that. Andre Kosterman and his folks have done a phenomenally great job in that endeavor. In addition, the Trade Tech is an individual company that is a member of the World Economic Forum and TFDI's founding member. They completed the first trade finance NFT transaction on the XDC network. And Christoph Gugelman and his team have done a great job of bringing this technology into the real world. So one way to think about this is climate change is a carbon accounting problem, carbon accounting challenge. And in business, there's an old adage that says, that which gets measured gets done. So blockchain technology can help us track, as I've talked about, the environmental impacts all along the supply chain. Carbon is being produced globally around the world, released into the atmosphere. That's the challenge. Countries are getting together at the COP conferences and promising to make reductions. Well, in order to make those reductions, we have got to have good carbon accounting. And so adding carbon accounting into the supply chain is critically important. Reductions in impact can facilitate overall business health. Again, ESG metrics actually are correlated to greater business health. Obviously, we're going to do everything we can to reduce, increase energy efficiency, reduce energy use, reduce carbon emissions, but some impacts cannot be further reduced, are instead going to be offset. And I could do an entire talk just on offsets. It's a fairly complicated area, but effectively, as long as offsets are not thought about completely obviating the need for reductions in impact, they can be very helpful. And of course, standards have to be met, and data accuracy must ensure that the offsets are correctly retired. And this is the same thing in the supply chain, that if you have an NFT that represents a real world good in transit, you can't reuse that NFT and resell it because it's made it to its destination, and that NFT has to be retired or burned or however you describe that. Similarly, carbon offsets can be used once and then have to be retired. And blockchain can help with all of this. It's for all of the reasons that I've described. So I started by asking about the similarities between the environment of blockchain. And here I'm talking about the parallel between the challenges of the global supply chain and the challenges of the global climate change challenge. And so there's a lot of data involved over long distances in both cases, both for blockchain and for carbon. And all of that data has to be kept straight, and we have to do everything we can to improve that data. And blockchain is an excellent solution. And so with that, I will say a big thank you to Andrea and Eric and the Blockchain Supply Chain Association for setting this up. I want to thank the whole XDC team, and a special thanks to Kathy Slider, my XDC colleague, who was instrumental in helping with the preparation of this. So with that, Andrea and/or Eric, I'm going to turn it back over to you guys, and we can see if we've got some questions. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Bill. That was really, really interesting speech. It was great to see to link it in a broad picture, supply chain finance, trade finance, to the whole stuff thing, and see how perfectly blockchain can fit into the space as glue between the two worlds. Turning into the audience, maybe to make some questions on it. If any, between the attendants.
We have a question in the Q&A from Anonymous, the world famous Anonymous. So we talk a lot about traceability by using blockchains, right? Something we hear often. Still, it's not widely scalable yet. So question number one, Bill or Andrea, if you want to comment on scalability, but apart from traceability features of blockchain, how can we go beyond it? And if you have some comments around that, if not, I can also give a couple of examples.
Sure, I can start with that, and then Andrea and Eric, if you want to come in on top of that. So I'm looking at the question over here. So traceability using blockchain is actually very scalable. So I guess I'd say it isn't widely used yet, but it is highly, highly scalable. That's the wonderful thing about it. Part of what we're all here, I think, to do is to try to find ways to make it happen and make it happen faster. And so the nice thing about this is it's an automated system. It's got traceability. And just as, if you want to think of, I think of the example as I go to the grocery store, and X number of years ago, there was a manual cashier typing in the price of everything. And now there's no manual cashier. Everybody is scanning every good that comes through, and that technology has been scaled and used everywhere. And so blockchain is very much like that. And I do think maybe what you're saying is it's not yet widely adopted, and what can we do to get it to be adopted more quickly? I think this forum is intended to help with that. That's my answer.
Eric, would you like to add something? You said you had your own point of view.
Absolutely. To Bill's comment, right? It is not widely used right now, but we are seeing tremendous momentum around actual use. We're seeing it in mining. We're seeing it in agriculture. We're seeing it in aerospace. We're seeing it in automotive. So the momentum around blockchain solutions in the real world is definitely accelerating. To answer the second part of the question, how do we use blockchain beyond just traceability? And traceability, again, is a fantastic, and telecommunications, thank you, Jack. How do we use it beyond traceability, which is a fantastic use case, of course, specifically in supply chain. I always am very proud to talk about the solution here in Canada offered by Walmart Canada and DLT Labs around reconciliation of freight payment processes, right? Has nothing to do with traceability. Walmart Canada uses 70 different trucking companies to carry their goods between their distribution centers and their stores. In the pre-blockchain world, they used to send manual invoices or spreadsheets around. So they would, pick up the goods, carry the goods, deliver the goods, send the invoice, fight over invoices that were probably incorrect because of XYZ reasons. Back and forth emails, then reconcile all these invoices and then pay the invoices, right? 11 steps, 70% of 500,000 invoices annually were in dispute. That's a lot of disputes. But by going on blockchain, they shifted the way that they see their data. Of course, they're using IoT, they're using smart contracts, but they're also using the distributed ledger and the single visibility window that they have between all these different partners, and it shifted the way they do the invoicing. So instead of doing something, invoicing, fighting over it, they do something, the invoice starts right away. The dispute mechanism was completely revamped because of the IoT devices, geolocation, and blockchain technology, trusted information between different partners. So the dispute actually was resolved before the shipment was actually completed and the transaction came to an end. By doing that, by shifting the way they saw their data, they were able to eliminate virtually 100% of these disputes. So from 70% of 500,000 shipments or 500,000 invoices down to below 1%. So that's another beautiful use case in supply chain, in transportation, in logistics for the use of blockchain and, beyond traceability. So we just have to open our eyes.
Yeah, let me reframe a little, by the way, Eric, your discussion, and I will end it up. I'm in the loop. Blockchain is indeed the right fit for trade in general. We're talking about automation, we're talking about traceability, which of course embodies a large part in international trade. Think about all the documents connected to the origin. Blockchain brings in a kind of automation, so it creates a governance tool. You create another jurisdictional layer for all the players, stakeholders involved in international trade to interact between each other. So besides being scalable, blockchain has the possibility to create a smooth, scalable, and cross-jurisdictional environment for the stakeholders, especially the smallest one, to interact, to get the whole way into the big picture. And that's besides being scalable, besides being traceable, that's what the right fit is for blockchain, in my opinion. Being nowadays a long-term trade professional, this is the right fit. Bring it in, of course, ESG related issues and solve them, by the way.
I see there's another question here. Should we kick this one off, Eric?
Yeah, you bet. So what are the biggest challenges for corporates in using third generations rather than private permission blockchains? And that's a great question, right? Because we hear about enterprise level solutions, a lot in the supply chain, of course, going on, for example, Hyperledger, right? Private blockchains. And there's a concern over using public blockchains in the corporate world. What would you say to that, Bill?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Eric. I agree. And it's one of the things that's one of the least known. I will say again, I'm talking about XDC not because I'm an advocate or whatever, but also because it's the one that I know. So let me just start with that and say that XDC is hybrid. So you can have a node where the data resides. Again, think of it like accounting data, right? So if a company, a corporate wants to do accounting, they're not going to open up everything to everyone. But let's say it's a public company. They don't have every single line item and transaction. It'll be open to their accountants, but it won't be open to the public. But their P&L will be open to the public. And so if you think about, they're using some data that's public and some data that's private. And XDC was formed as an enterprise solution to be able to say, okay, we've got both of those as well. You can have a node where you keep all of your private data, and you can have the rest of the blockchain can have all of the public data, and it's built into the system. So I think that's better than my perspective. Obviously, that's better than simply a private one only, because it doesn't get to the transparency that ESG is asking for. If the data is literally on a public chain that anybody who wants to can interrogate it, that gives more credibility to it. And so there's an advantage to having the data that the public wants accessible. So that's my answer, is third generation allows hybrid, and particularly XDC. And I think that's the natural next evolution.
And to your point, Bill, right? Evolution, it's still it's an old technology, but it's still a very young technology, especially from an enterprise perspective. Just in the Ethereum world, we've seen a lot of changes and more to come, apparently. It's only the beginning. So it's a great place to be. And solutions exist beyond what we just see and what we just hear about in mainstream. So it's important that we stay educated on upcoming technologies and go beyond just our perceptions. We have another question that just came in from Matthew. Thank you, Matthew. ESG data should be publicly visible for sure. Again, it depends, but the evidence supporting it, that's very important as well, required for audit and assurance of sustainability reporting might be sensitive, thus a good XDC use case.
Sounds more like an answer than a question, but yes, Matt, I think you got what I was trying to say, and I think you've summarized that well. And I agree with that. And I do think the core of what your comment is critical is that there is some data. Businesses are entitled to have proprietary data, and they don't have to live in a completely glass house, so to speak. But blockchain gives us the capability to have the data that's private be inextricably linked to the public data, so that they can't have one set of data inside ExxonMobil Corporation and say a different thing on the outside. Just throw them under the bus. So it's that kind of thing. And I agree that connection can actually help with integrity and transparency.
And I love how you started the webinar, Bill, tying in a network ecosystem with a natural ecosystem. Being a nature lover myself, I love that analogy.
Great, thanks.
There is a comment, by the way, Eric, from Luca. Yes, he's from Italy, this guy. It's talking about Monesago living the space, living blockchain. Monesago, for those who are not aware of it, it was based actually on R3 Corda, so private blockchain network, and basically deals with provides solutions for anti-money laundering, anti-corruption, fraud in international trade. Monesago recently announced it was, ditching a blockchain solution and getting on cloud. The only comment I have on the personal side is that blockchain can provide for, trusted data in accordance to certain governance. So to leave that space, I don't know, my feeling is not maybe the right choice. That's my personal leaving. My feeling, I leave it on to you, Bill, maybe to expand a little on that, especially when you do deal with anti-money laundering, with fraud, duplication of invoices. Indeed, that's right where blockchain can step into massively.
Yeah, I mean, I think if the question is about blockchain's applicability to solutions, I think it's widely applicable to a lot of solutions, and that doesn't mean everybody will adopt it all the time. It has these characteristics that are kind of built in. We're very early. Somebody said, one of my colleagues said, it's day one of blockchain. It's early. I can tell you, as somebody who was at not quite day one, but whatever, week one of solar energy, when I started in solar energy, nobody had solar energy on their house. Solar electricity, and now it's everywhere. And so I do think, and some people, will leave it or not use it. So I do think the capabilities of blockchain to do some of the things we've discussed here are really great. And it doesn't solve every problem automatically, seamlessly, and for every person or business. So I think that's part of my comment.
Yeah, and I don't know about this company specifically, but blockchain's not the solution for everything, right? So I know we used to joke a few years ago, blockchain's going to change the world, right? It's going to take over everything. And now we know that's not true. That was about the hype more than anything else. But blockchain's not the right solution for everybody and every solution. If you don't need to exchange data, trusted data with different partners, or you can use different types of systems. You can use API. You can still use EDI if it's a 70-year-old technology. Hey, good for you, right? You can still use faxes in some cases. I don't know why you would, but that's another story. Blockchain's not the answer for everything, so maybe it wasn't the answer for this company. Who knows?
Not only, by the way, Eric, blockchain alone cannot do the whole stuff, especially in trade. It's against sport. So if I see perfect fit technology in trade and supply chain as an interaction between blockchain itself, artificial intelligence, machine learning, cloud systems, and all the stuff. So if a company decides to step back, maybe it's temporarily, maybe it will be back when the technology will be more consolidated. It's their own choice. Yeah. For sure, this is first wave, so I expect more things, more bad news coming in the future, some good ones. So we're the infancy, we have to admit it.
Yeah, I'd like to. Sorry, I'd like to add one more thing. It just really occurs to me. We've obviously, we being broadly the blockchain and particularly cryptocurrency, have had some volatility of late. There's no question about it. And some people may see that as a nail in the coffin, or a bad sign or something. And I just remind people, I mean, those of us who lived through, the internet being invented and implemented, it was around in mid 90s, and people were starting to use it for email. And there was a tremendous, economic crash in 2000, the dot-com bubble burst. And lots of companies went out of business, and some people are like, oh, I'm not doing this internet thing. And here we are, 22 years later. So I think, people are going to come and go, but I don't think this technology is going to go away. I do think it is going to become the backbone, or a backbone, an important central part of data being used globally.
It is foundational technology, and to your point, right? Us gray-haired people, we've seen come and go different technology, but it's an evolution and not just a take it or lose it kind of scenario. And speaking of evolution, we used to say blockchain. We're seeing a change of vocabulary around Web3. We saw Jack Dorsey talk about Web5 already, right? So it's day one in this new technology. Exciting times.
I usually define this one as an evolution leading to a revolution, Rick. You and I were deeply involved into trade and supply chain. We know what we're talking about is the evolution from paper-based documents to bleeps, you see, and electronic records. So that's the evolution. But definitely in the middle term, this will lead to a revolution.
So we're coming up to the top of the hour. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Nothing in the Q&A. Nothing in the chat so far. Some great comments in the chat, so feel free to add your points of view. I'd like to thank Andrea. Any last words before we go? And Bill, any last words?
Well, last words from my side was just let's say the kickoff of a series of meeting that we're going to have. It's the very first one, by the way, Bill mentioned. The following one, 7th of July. We're going to have a special guest. We're going to have Mr. Andre Clusterman with us, talking about trade finance distribution initiatives. And this will lead to the following one, most probably in September, with trade tech people. I still have to have the wrong confirmation, but I'm pretty sure they're going to accept me with us. So take it as a very first beat of what we are doing shortly afterwards. Bill, if you want to conclude.
I just want to say thanks again to everybody. Thanks to the participants for coming and for doing the work that you're doing to learn and to help us all implement this stuff, make the world a better place.
Well said, Bill. Thank you very much. And thank you for our audience. Thank you, everyone. Again, we will be sending the slides out. We will be sending a link to our YouTube. We were live streaming on YouTube. Feel free to join our channel there at the Blockchain Supply Chain Association. We'll send out a little link for that as well. And if you have any questions, Bill's contact are right on screen. So feel free to reach out. I'm sure he'd be happy to answer your questions. So with that said, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day and see you on the next one.
See you next time.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody. Bye, Bill.
Ciao.